Today, I'm very excited to be hosting an extraordinary founder and investor who has built and invested in not one, not two, not three, not four, but five unicorns. Please welcome Neeraj Bhargava. Neeraj built WNS Global as the largest global outsourcing company in the world and listed it on the New York Stock Exchange, touching a market cap of $1.15 billion on day one. Journey of building WNS Global is so extraordinary, right? Like 22,000 people in the company, listing it on the New York Stock Exchange.
Unlike a lot of startups, we didn't start with a view that, look, let's go to a garage or a small place and open an office and scrub the floor and start in that manner. We actually had an equity line from Bob Pincus to say, go out and buy something.
Neeraj was the first investor in MakeMyTrip and NetMagic, and also invested in Off Business, Big Basket, Zivame, Pepperfry, OML Media, MedGenome, Fubo TV, and many other large businesses at the intersection of consumer internet and technology.
We grew from 15 to almost $200 million within 4 years.
If you were to look at it today, like how has our ecosystem evolved?
You're leaving a job to do a startup, chances are your neighbor and the neighbor's neighbor is also doing the same thing. When I left McKinsey, people thought I was crazy.
Key skill sets that you feel founders need to have in a founding team, to build large companies in this space today. What are some sectors and opportunities for founders to build large companies in today? Somebody who's been on both sides of the coin, like what are some common mistakes that you've seen founders make? Welcome to this super exciting episode of the Accelerate Founder Academy. Our goal at Accelerate is to build the finest accelerator program in the world, helping founders from Bharat build large and generational companies. Today, I'm very excited to be hosting an extraordinary founder and investor who has built and invested in not one, not two, not three, not four, but five unicorns. Please welcome Neeraj Bhargava, who besides sunsetting Zodiac Capital, selling Rainshine Entertainment, is also now diving into the generative AI space. As a founder, Neeraj built WNS Global as the largest global outsourcing company in the world and listed it on the New York Stock Exchange, touching a market cap of $1.15 billion on day one. During his tenure, WNS was spread across 11 countries and employed more than 22,000 people. As an investor, Neeraj extraordinarily was the first investor in MakeMyTrip and NetMagic, and also invested in Off Business, Big Basket, Zivame, Pepperfry, OML Media, MedGenome, Fubo TV, and many other large businesses at the intersection of consumer internet and technology. Currently, Neeraj is building a generative AI startup, which is yet to announce. Neeraj, welcome to the Founder Academy. Super excited to host you and learn from you.
Thank you, Karan. Very nice of you to have me. And I love these introductions because they only say nice things. And just one minor correction, WNS wasn't the largest, but it was one of the first companies of its category to list. So,
Got it. Got it.
thanks.
Great. So Neeraj would actually love to, like understand a lot more about your journey, right? Like it has been over 30 years as a founder, investor, operator, right? Like would love for you to take us through your journey, the audience, right from the time you started at McKinsey to then essentially building WNS, starting one of India's first venture yeah, studios, right? Launching Zodiac Capital, then essentially building Rainshine Entertainment, and now you're delving into the generative AI space. So would love to understand this journey over the last 30 years.
Yeah, no, I think, look, it's been quite a ride. I mean, that's, a very obvious and cliched things for me to say, given that I've done a variety of things. Uh, Clearly, the grounding in McKinsey was extraordinary. It's a wonderful place to be. It's a place, most importantly, you work with some very smart people. And it's a phenomenal place to breed ideas, grow as a professional. And, I had the good fortune of working in tech, which was, in the days I was involved, it was a very small practice at McKinsey. So, I had the fortune of thinking about how tech would evolve ground up. Did a
Interesting.
mix of client work, some interesting research type projects, and that was clearly something that shaped how I developed as a professional. And I had also a good fortune of working in multiple parts of the world. So, having some sort of orientation, which was, not just limited to India or Bharat, as you call it,
Hmm.
but also, having worked in the US, exposed to the UK, also, client work that took me to other places as well. So I had the good fortune of getting all of that kind of wrapped up in 8.5, 9 year period that I was there, and that clearly was a very important part of shaping me as a professional. Uh, and I think that after that, life was a little bit more spontaneous. I mean, people wouldn't expect that of me, but most of my decisions were very much intuitive. So
Interesting. You always knew you wanted
clearly,
to be a
sorry.
Did you always know you wanted to start up and be a founder?
Uh, I knew I would do something on my own. I think, there are some minor details of my background which very few people know that even before McKinsey, I was involved in an entrepreneurial venture, which was tiny. It's worth another story, but I enjoyed that a lot. And I always knew in the back of my mind that, look, I'll want to do something on my own. But, after McKinsey, when we got down to starting something called eVentures with, a few other people. One of them was Sandeep Singhal at Next, who ended up starting Nexus later, and another good friend of mine called Rajesh Jog. I think we weren't thinking of that as a startup. We were thinking of that as a fund, although it was a
Hmm.
startup in its own way.
Yeah.
It ended up being a startup in another way that we actually flamed out and shut down in 2 years, which was terribly heartbreaking. But I think we learned some of our biggest lessons, or at least me personally, that look, try not to depend on somebody else who can influence what you have to do, and try to have more and more control of your destiny. And that's what I try to do going forward.
Got it. Got it. And your journey of building WNS Global is so extraordinary, right? Like 22,000 people in the company, listing it on the New York Stock Exchange, market cap of $1.1 billion, right? So so take us through that journey. Like how did the idea come about? Like essentially outsourcing solutions for the world, right? Like that's a global problem. And so when you started, what was the key insight? And then like would also love to understand that as you scaled, like when you went beyond your 0 to 1, as you started getting few customers, what were some of the different challenges you faced then as compared to what something you might have faced when in your 0 to 1 journey?
So I think, look, there are many ways to build a company, and WNS was not a classic startup. Interestingly, if you look at that industry, which was popularly known as BPO at that time, there were about 200 odd companies. We were not among the early ones to do it. In fact, I
Hmm.
stepped into it a bit later after eVentures shut down. The good fortune of connecting with a former colleague of mine, Pulak Prasad, who's a very well-known guy now, and one of the best investors that exists anywhere on the planet today. And Pulak and I, who was a Bob Pincus then, I talked about, and I had done a fair bit of work in the emergence of BPO when I was in McKinsey, and Pulak's thought was that, well, look, why don't we team up, which is Robert Pincus
Hmm.
and myself, and there was one more chap, my former chairman, David Tibble, involved, and we try and build something in this space which is big and enduring. And so, unlike a lot of startups, we didn't start with a sort of view that, look, let's go to a garage or a small place and open an office and scrub the floor and start in that manner. We actually had an equity line from Bob Pincus to say, go out and buy something
Hmm.
and use that to start. And so, interestingly, all the BPO companies from that era, which really lasted, the test of time, or rather grew and generated a lot of value for their investors. We were all built through acquisitions, whether it's EXL, which was Conseco, or Genpact, of course, which GE, which is a well-known story, take Intelenet, which was through Barclays. They all came up through that route where you uh, made an acquisition, changed how it worked to kind of go with a new model, which in those days was doing that work offshore. I think people only remember BPO for call centers, but reality is that's a small fraction of what the industry was all about. There was a ton of
Hmm.
other work we did: legal, finance and accounting, data analytics, you know, variety of industry specific processes. So I think we had the good fortune of working um, with some raw material already there. We acquired this piece of British Airways, which gave us
Hmm.
a, unlike Genpact, which got like hundreds of millions of dollars from GE, we got $15 million, or actually perhaps even smaller. And then we started to grow that. And that story was extraordinary, and one of those cases where lots of things, and most important of them, a great team, comes together, and then you just go for it. So we grew from 15 to almost $200 million within 4 years.
Wow.
And that was extraordinary. It rarely happens that way, but we managed to do that. And then we didn't think we were listable, but some investment bankers persuaded us to say, look, you're ready to go now. We're very fortunate we listed in 2006, market crashed in 2007. So, there were other post-listing problems that came with that, but the good news was that we managed to list top $1 billion market cap. The word unicorn didn't exist in those days.
Yeah.
And I think the most interesting part, what I love to really talk about, is that we consumed only $38 million of capital before we
Hmm.
listed. Okay.
Hmm.
And I think that is one thing that today's entrepreneurs typically are not doing, which is being capital efficient.
Hmm.
And also, I mean, there are a lot of other differences. We never took any money out till we listed. I mean, that happens all the time today. So it's a different world today, and I understand and appreciate why it is that way. But that aside,
Hmm.
I think look, the alignment that was there with the interests of the shareholders and the commitment to really create value for your shareholders was at a different level altogether. And I think we were very glad and fortunate that we managed to do that.
Hmm. Hmm. No, I think it's a fascinating story, right? Because I think it's also very contrarian from how, as you mentioned, like early stage founders think about it today, right? Like, you started with an equity line already, right, in the business, and then you looked at an acquisition route to then scale the business, make it more operationally efficient, introduce more technology, and then essentially being very capital efficient to scale the business. Maybe like how founders build today is either, I mean, they would first have an idea, get some revenue, then start looking at raising capital, or maybe the other way around, where they would kind of raise capital first and then have to burn through a lot of it to then scale, right? So I think great learning there, that essentially like maybe like inorganic routes like acquisitions, and then running the business very efficiently, and operationally well, could be a great way to scale, especially in a market which is very large, which has a very high time, and right, like it was the right place at the right time to be kind of building
Yeah.
like a global outsourcing solution.
No, absolutely. I think, look, timing is very important. And one of the things that also founders should note is that there is a time when your multiple will be high because you're a scarce asset,
Hmm.
and you should not assume that that would remain. And I think, look, at the end of the day, the most important thing for a founder always is just build a great company and not worry about the outcome. I mean, it's a
Hmm.
very hard thing to communicate to a lot of people. I know everyone goes with stars in the eyes and look, I'm going to make a few $100 million or a billion, and I'm going to be in the newspapers or on Shark Tank or wherever. I think, look, that is to me an outcome of what I mean. Look, there were days
Yeah.
when your achievement gave you pride. I mean, today sometimes generating pride itself becomes an achievement. I think I read this, by the way, it's not original. I read it in a newspaper the other day, and I think that is really it's really important that I think focus on what you will get done.
Yeah.
Uh, I think people always talk about follow your dream. I think dream is interesting. Dreams also are sometimes unreal. I think once you're past the dream stage, I think most important is follow your mission, which is like you set out to do something for someone. Okay,
Hmm.
whether it's make a difference to your customer or build a great company, give great returns to your investors and yourself. I think that focus on the mission is very important. That what did you set out to do,
Hmm.
and are
Hmm.
you achieving that? I would say, look, if your wealth creation is an outcome of what you've done, it's always a more purer journey, and also quite often that's the right way to think about it, even if you want to create wealth for yourself.
Yeah, yeah. It can't be like the input metric, or it can't be the reason why you're building something. And I think in the startup ecosystem, all of us are quite guilty of that, in that respect, that we try to over glorify entrepreneurship a lot and founders a lot, versus maybe just celebrating real execution, and really focusing on your vision and building a large company.
Yeah, I think look, a lot of it is about media. A lot of it is about you starting to believe an alternative reality, and sometimes the alternative and real merge, but quite often they don't. And I think, look, we just hype up and over glamorize a lot of this. I mean, look, you know, you'll only get headlines if you raise a lot of money. Okay,
Yeah.
you'll only get headlines if uh, you sold your company at a astronomical value. You'll get headlines when, these days, of course, you get headlines when something bad happens as well. But I think a lot of it is about media obsession and what people think about you. And
Yeah.
but I think deep inside, I think founders who build good companies, I think the most important thing for them was, actually succeeding, getting over the hurdles and getting to your journey, or what I call whatever mission you set for yourself, getting that
Hmm.
done. And if you look at even some of the portfolio companies, I mean, Deep's Kalra of MakeMyTrip has written about it a lot. I mean, I think there are many times he was close to bankruptcy within a week or two, or a month or two of being completely out of business. And I think that's the thing you remember and take away the most. On how did you claw back and fight back from that situation? And
Yeah.
similarly, David Gandler at Fubo, which people in India know less about. I mean, someone I had invested in very early. I mean, I remember a conversation with him where he was 6 weeks away or 4 weeks away from running out of money,
Yeah.
and David was betting on one thing coming through. And I said, David, what's your plan B? And he just looked
Yeah.
at me and said, look, I don't believe in plan Bs, because then I don't work hard on my plan A. Now,
Wow.
that is some entrepreneur, man. I think, look, I
Yeah.
was shitting in my pants looking at what the outcome there would be. And
Yeah.
here's a guy who's put everything into it. And he was saying, I don't have a plan B. I'm just going to make my plan A
Yeah.
work. And I think
Yeah.
that is what it is. That is what it's really about. And that's the sort of courage I think sometimes you need to find within
Yeah.
yourself to really go and get these things done.
Yeah, yeah. No, I think super interesting. I think one thing that you mentioned, like maybe right idea, right time, right? So, like when you start, like before WNS, when you started the venture incubator, right, venture studio,
Yeah.
was it? How was the Indian, I mean, like consumer internet ecosystem back then? Like this is 98, 99. I mean, like I'm sure, like number of internet users in India would be in thousands, right? Like would not be very high, right? So was it like too early to be building something like that at that time? And I mean, like if you were to look at it today, like how has that ecosystem evolved?
See, I think, look, you already called me old because you said I've worked for 30 plus years. So I'm sure a lot of the guys who are hearing this haven't seen. As I've gone through these journeys, I think I've seen about three or four of those cycles where there is a big change and a big excitement around a technology or around an event. And everyone goes into sixth gear and gets very excited and start to build things. So if I were to look at it, I think I have not seen a frenzy or sort of a feeling of independence that people had that I saw in the dot-com boom period. It was another level altogether. It was I think we're reaching that stage, or we've reached that stage somehow again yet now. But they were unlike what we have today, and we are talking about UPI and ONDC and all the support that you've got. The Prime Minister is talking about
Interest rate.
startups and all those things. I
Yeah.
think, look, the people today are blessed that they have so much enthusiasm for entrepreneurship. Okay, at
Yeah.
that time, I mean, to think about Sanjeev Bikhchandani, Info Edge, Naukri came out of that era.
Yeah.
Of course, Make My Trip came out of that era. I think, look, there's hardly an ecosystem in place. I mean, there
Yeah.
were, a handful of investors, and we were there. There was us. Chris Capital was doing venture investing at that time before they changed. There was Westbridge. I think Sumir launched also around the same time. We had ICICI Ventures. We had a few others. Maybe five or six funds at best. And yeah, I mean, look, we were also fighting for deals even at that time. So it wasn't that there were a lot of deals in the market
It's
either.
still competitive.
Yeah, it is pretty competitive, and but I think a lot of things were the same itself. You had people leaving jobs to do these things, but there wasn't the support system you have. And today, if you're leaving a job to do a startup, chances are your neighbor and the neighbor's neighbor is also doing the same thing. I mean,
Yeah.
and there it
Yeah.
was a very lonely world. If somebody
Mainstream
was doing
today.
that, they were considered crazy. They were considered
Yeah.
crazy. I mean, when I left McKinsey, people thought I was crazy, okay, to do this. So I
Yeah.
think we were taking a much bigger risk environmentally. I mean, look, considering
Yeah.
how people would think of us
Yeah.
at that time than we did today. But
Yeah.
bottom line is, look, the process is still the same. You got to raise multiple rounds of money. You got to build your company. You got to stick with it. You'll go through ups and downs, and it's a normal thing you go through any cycle. I don't think that has changed too much.
Hmm. Got it. Got it. I think your journey is very fascinating because like you've seen both sides of the coin as a founder and as an investor, right? And obviously you as a founder you built WNS Global into such a large company, but as an investor, right? Like you were one of the first investors in MakeMyTrip. Fubo TV has been one of your best investments. Off Business, Big Basket, like these are very very large consumer internet companies in India, right? And to kind of back them at an early stage, is super interesting. So, like, and at Accelerate, we are a 0 to 1 program, right? Like, we meet hundreds of founders day in, day out, who are trying to build something very large, right? So, would love, while you've elaborated a little bit about Deep at Make My Trip, right? Like, would love to understand, how did Make My Trip, Off Business, Big Basket initially happen? How did, like, if you can share some anecdotes, example, like their journey, how did the founders reach out? What was the initial pitch? Right, like what was your view when you saw those businesses, like how did the rounds close, right? And maybe also, like if you can share a little something which is a little common across all of your best investments, like what were some traits that you saw in founders, that maybe like early stage founders can replicate today.
See, I think, look, I'll answer the second part of the question first. What was common in all these companies? I think, I mean, frankly, good leader and good leaders. In the case of Big Basket, there wasn't one person. It was actually one of the rare companies which was managed as a group by, a handful of people. And it was
Yeah.
very hard to separate who did what for a long time. Okay. And they were so well coordinated and they worked so well as a team that it didn't really matter who was a leader there. Okay.
Hmm.
But in others, like, I mean, look, Ashish and Ruchi at Off Business. Look, also I want to give credit where it's due. I mean, Off Business was not something I championed. Another one of my partners, he championed that, and I backed it up, and obviously got a little bit more involved with the company a bit later. But I think again in those two we saw people who had a lot of clarity and what they wanted and a lot of passion behind making a difference. I mean, Ashish talked a lot about how he wants to change the smaller business and environment in India, and I think that
Hmm.
was his passion. And I think I'll talk about Deep. I think Deep's was a more interesting case, but I think if you look at it, what is common among all these guys? I mean, just that they went on a mission to say, look, I want to change this thing. And I think that sort of passion is what drove. I've backed, I mean, other entrepreneurs who didn't succeed as much. And I would say the real difference is that, look, it's about being very clear about what you wanted to get done for your customers and for yourself. I think that clarity is really important. And then, of course,
Hmm.
after that, it's a matter of, how determined you are and how you stick to it. And I think people like Deep and I mean, I've heard from Ashish also. He had to struggle a lot to raise money. I came at the
Hmm.
tail end of it. Well, for us, it was very clear when we saw him. We said, "Look, we want to invest," and there was a bit of
Yeah.
haggling, and we got it done. But I think in case of Deep and David, and David is Fubo, there's a lot of struggle. And if you look at the Big Basket guys, also they had another venture which didn't work as well for them, and they came back and said, "Look, the job is unfinished," and got back to groceries and built that. Now, the other part of your question was, look, some anecdotes and all that. So I think, look, the anecdote with Deep is very well captured. We met. He wanted to do this.
This is
We
what
said we
year?
want to. I think we're talking late 1999 or early 2000,
Wow.
somewhere around that time.
Yeah.
And he wanted to do this, but we couldn't agree on terms. And I was working out of an office near Churchgate in Mumbai. If you know Mumbai, it's the other end of Mumbai right now. I mean, most people don't go that far. And Deep left my office in a huff saying, look, I don't like your terms. I don't think I want to do this. And started to travel to the airport. And those days there was no sea link, so it was like a 1 hour, 1.5 hour drive to the airport. And I think it was in a taxi or something. And he called me halfway. And we did have mobile phones, by the way. And he called me and said, hey, can we give it one more shot? So there was only
Hmm.
one mall in Bombay called Crossroads.
Hmm.
And I used to go there to get fresh juice. So I said, look, there's this juice center. Can we meet there? And he said, okay. So we stopped it. He had enough time to catch his flight. So we met there and I think we argued for a little bit of time and then we agreed on terms. And then he kind of pulled out a pen and a napkin and wrote down the terms on that and said, this is it. I want you to sign on this and I don't want you to change your mind. I said, sure.
Yeah.
So effectively, we agreed on this on a napkin. And I think
Wow.
one of Deep or I, one of us has the napkin with us. So I think
Yeah.
I don't remember. I think I saw it in his office, or probably I think it's in my office. But we have the napkin still with us, and I think that was a sort of a interesting anecdote there on how that got done. And of course, uh, he went on to build this company after a lot of struggle.
Yeah.
I think the Big Basket story is also interesting in another way, in the sense which I don't think even the founder team is aware of what happened there. Uh, we had not launched our fund by the
Big
time,
Basket is
but
what year?
it was a Big Basket. I think I invested in 2013 or 14, one of those, at somewhere in that time frame.
Hmm.
And we were not the first investors there. We were coming in Series A or Series B, I think. And I think Ascent had already invested, and so Helion and us were both looking at it together to invest in that round. And we had not raised our fund, but and we had a lot of arguments inside that should we do this before we raised our fund. And I was very, very passionate about one thing, that look, I think that the company is going to work. If we say we've done this, our
Hmm.
fundraising will get easier. So let's convince some of our investors. Let's put the money, warehouse this deal, and raise the fund, saying we got a great deal.
Hmm.
Uh, so when the IC met, we talked about it and we said, look, let's at least test it with some investors. And so when we called some investors outside India, they all said this is crap. There was a company
Hmm.
called Webvan which happened in the old dot-com boom and bust, which really blew up billions of dollars. And they said, look, this is another Webvan. Grocery never works. You can't do it. So what I think the founder team doesn't know there is, I had to really fight for this one. Okay,
Hmm.
to say, look, I think this is going to work. And
Hmm.
interestingly, what
And
happened
why did you
was
have
that
this confidence?
I
Like,
just like the team. I just like the team. And K Ganesh introduced me to them. And I thought that, look, these guys were so well put together and so clear in terms of how exactly they will be better than anybody else in the market.
hmm.
And it's just an instinct. I just felt that this team will work. Okay.
Hmm.
Now, what happened there was, look, somehow the IC got persuaded. We did the deal. And interestingly, during our fundraise, they had an up round and they got very
Hmm.
positive publicity. And that really allowed us to raise our fund much faster.
Push your fundraise as
So,
well.
yeah, so I think, look, sometimes if you feel strongly about the people, okay,
Yeah.
just follow your instinct. I think that's really important. In this case, I think I really felt that, look, this is a team that can get a lot done. They can execute, and I think that was and this is an execution business.
Hmm.
So
Hmm.
it was clearly some sixth sense I had that this will get done.
Yeah, yeah. I think some common traits that I'm seeing across, all your investments as an outsider is that all of your investments are actually category creators, right? Like Make My Trip, like travel back in 1999, consumer internet, off business, being one of the largest SMB players in the country, Zivame, Pepperfry, Big Basket, right? Like online grocery. So, like beyond just the ambition and passion of the team and how well they are and how passionate about their problem, I think this is also one trait that I am kind of noticing across a lot of your investments.
No, I think also there are a lot of failures, and I'm happy to talk equally about them. But I like the notion of doing something and being the first company in the market to do that. That to
Hmm.
me
Hmm.
is a personal choice. There are a lot of people who invest very well by not necessarily backing the first company. There even Big Basket. I guess there were other grocery companies at that time. I think Ronnie had one, and
Hmm.
others also Stop or something there was. But
Yeah.
I think it's important, and also top down. I think a decision we made at Zodius was that when we started a fund, Flipkart had already happened, Snapdeal had already happened. So we said, look,
Hmm.
let's ignore horizontal e-commerce. Let us go after verticals. Okay, so
Hmm.
that was a top-down strategy discussion. So that's why we had Big Basket, we had Pepperfry, we had Zivame. They were all vertical plays, and I think we did
Hmm.
well with that category. That basic decision was a good one. So I think that's also something that it's important from a fund side to think about, saying, look, what is a natural outcome of the successes today? Well, what is going to follow, and
Hmm.
therefore, how do we anticipate that and make sure that we are building a portfolio in anticipation of what is coming, as opposed to being the
Yeah.
10th company to do the same thing.
Yeah, yeah. No, I think that insight into that play is super important. As you said, like back then, you noticed that Flipkart raised so much money, and maybe like let's go after vertical marketplaces. Like that's such a powerful insight back then, right? So
Yeah.
I think that's super interesting. And like any thoughts on, let's say, your anti portfolio, or the companies that maybe like you thought you wish you could have invested in, or maybe you invested but like with the same thesis but didn't succeed to the levels that you guys wanted.
Look, I used the word instinctive earlier, and I think that is also sometimes my biggest problem. Okay, and where I make mistakes. I mean, where I make mistakes most is that, and this is a pretty important part for all the VCs who probably see this. I think it is really important that you have an entrepreneur who's fairly independent and who can independently get stuff done. And the role of the VC is a counselor
Mm,
and not a doer. And I sometimes forgot that because I've also operated things. And so therefore,
mm,
I have taken the leap of faith that, look, if this problem is there, the founder lacks this, doesn't worry, I can help supplement that. I think,
yeah.
look, that never worked for me. Okay. Anytime I didn't have an independent A grade entrepreneur, okay, it did not work. Okay. And
Mm,
we did have in some cases where we had to get rid of founders and still get the company going. I'm not proud of that, but you got to look after the investors' money too. So we had to do things like that. We got good, decent outcomes, but not great outcomes. The great outcomes always came with a situation where the founder was, I mean, I would say I would qualify for that at WNS too. I mean,
mm,
Warburg left me alone. They let me manage the company, run the company. Yes, they were wonderful in terms of being available for counsel. Quite often, they took positions on things which were the right positions, and I learned from that. But I think it's really important that look, you got to back founders who are their own people, who can make their
mm.
own decisions, who are still humble and open for suggestions, but at the same time, it is their call and their decision. Anytime we had people, I backed people like that, it really worked.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah. And like, as somebody who's been on both sides of the coin, like, what are some common mistakes that you've seen, founders make?
Uh, I think uh, I think I think sometimes not recognizing, not seeing certain things, which is most important. Mostly mistakes are blind sides that you develop. Sometimes it happens out of hubris, and sometimes it happens out of ignorance. But most of the time, that mistake continues because you tend to get very stubbornly behind that. So you make a wrong call on people. I've seen that
Hmm.
happen a lot. That you got a wrong team member, and in many ways, look, I'm pretty cut and dry about these things. Look, if something is not working, then changing that is good for both, because the person who is not a fit also suffers, and the
Hmm.
person
Yeah.
who is using that person or rather employing that person is also suffering. So I think most of the time it is that you're on the wrong path, but you've not changed directions. You've got wrong people, but you've not changed the team. It's a lot of it is about making those mistakes by not recognizing that things have changed, and you have to change along with that. And I
Hmm.
think some of the best founders are people who adapt to the market, adapt to the situation, adapt to the organization. I think that's very important. I think that sort of nimbleness is something very, very important.
Interesting, interesting. And would love your thoughts on the whole founder fund relationship, right? So like, you've been a founder yourself, and maybe you thought that you had this knack of like wanting to get things done yourself, right? So, but generally, like what are like some of the best founder fund relationships that you have seen, which have scaled also?
Look, I mean, I'm again very fortunate to have worked with some extraordinarily good people. I mean, like take one you haven't mentioned, which Mahesh Pratap Neni at MedGenome. I think, look, this guy I have a wonderful relationship with, or Kumar Ritesh at Sai Pharma, which is one of my portfolio companies, which is still alive and very, very good entrepreneur. And I think most of the time, look, I like to keep it informal. I think board if you're only dependent on board meetings for information,
Yeah.
uh, then I think there's a certain stage where that is the right thing. Okay, and in fact, after that stage, if you're doing more than that, then something is wrong. But that aside, I think, look, I think the most important thing is alignment. And there is a lot of reason. There are a lot of reasons for misalignment. For example, if a fund is at a stage where it has to exit, and I've gone through a lot of that in the last 2 years. We are at the tail end of a fund and we have to exit, but the founder doesn't want to exit. So therefore, how do you kind of reach a balance between the fund's
Hmm.
objectives and founder's objective? But at the end of the day, I think, look, it's really important for both people to understand the other side of it. From a founder's perspective, I mean, usually if you've got a good fund manager, then you've got to recognize that they have an insane amount of responsibility and a burden they carry on spending other people's money. Okay.
Yeah.
And so therefore, being wise about how you use the money, understanding what pressures they face. Very few
Yeah.
founders have actually asked me the question, what's going on with you? Okay.
Hmm.
I think it's really
Hmm.
important. Well, I mean, look, there's a certain amount of glamour you put to the VC's role. I mean, look, it's a shitty
Yeah.
job. It's very, very
Yeah.
hard. Okay. So from that standpoint, I mean, trying to understand, well, what is the fund manager going through? I think that's also important. Okay. On the other hand, I think from the fund manager's perspective, I use the word cut and dry and all that. I think, look, you know, sometimes you got to think that way. But that aside, I think, look, it's very important. Fund managers putting their head into this. The founder is putting
Hmm.
their heart and soul into it. There's a
Hmm.
lot more emotion involved in that. And to understand really, look, what they're going through and having that sense of empathy, I think that's
Hmm.
really important. I've not always been great at that, but I think by and large, my batting average is pretty decent. So I think that's also very important. I think a lot of it is about listening and putting yourself in the other person's shoes and saying, look, what's this person going through? And how do I
Hmm.
understand that? If you understand what the other person is going through, then your
Hmm.
ability to kind of find the balance is much higher.
Yeah.
Okay.
Hmm.
But I think what I do have a real problem with is why when there is an adversarial relationship painted as it's very glamorous to go out on Twitter and say, I hate VCs. And I don't see many VCs saying I hate founders, but that aside, I think, look, I don't think that is right. I think everyone's doing their part in this whole journey, and there needs to be mutual empathy and respect.
Super interesting. I think a great insight into the life of a VC, right? But very interesting. I think moving on to like one section that like I really wanted to discuss on in the podcast is like as somebody like like who has seen like consumer internet landscape in India so closely and has seen it evolve, right? So and has been on many fronts, being on the cutting edge of those of many technologies, right? So, like, how is it evolving today? Like, what are some sectors and opportunities for founders to build large companies in today?
Look, I think firstly, I'm very, very envious of all the people who are in their 20s and 30s because um, there's so many exciting things. I mean, India is exciting. Venture, building a venture is exciting. Entrepreneurship is exciting. I think, look, you know, I'd love to start my life again at 25 or 30 and come back and build companies in this era because there's so much
You're still
opportunity to
building.
do stuff.
I mean, like,
Yeah, yeah,
I
yeah,
mean,
yeah, yeah.
we have
Yeah,
to
I'm doing that. I'm doing that, and I hopefully, I got a few more left. But that aside, I think, look, the energy you have at that age, as well as your sort of openness. You as you grow older, you get more doubtful and cynical about a lot of things. So I think that thing is lost a little bit. But that aside, I think, look, I think there's a lot of opportunity. I think what is really important on the consumer side is, uh, look, there's a lot of things that have happened which are, for example, I mean, consumption has gone up. Patterns of
Hmm.
consumption are changing. So it's becoming more and more of a science to figure out, well, what is next and what is
Hmm.
interesting. And so the idea and the product, I think, look, there's a lot of room for innovation. And like the other day when I was talking to some of you guys, you were showing me a plan which had to do something with ingredients to food as opposed to food itself. Now,
Hmm.
that's very cool. Okay,
Hmm.
because suddenly you're actually going backward into the chain and saying, well, how do I create a big company in that space? And also, food habits are changing, so there's a lot of scope for developing that. So I think one is the idea side of it. I think the other part, which is very interesting in the consumer thing, is look, there are also going to be a lot of business model changes. Okay, in terms of
Hmm.
how you operate. I mean. Uh, how you distribute has already changed a lot with digital, but I think like a super cool idea in about 10 years ago, whenever it started, was Groupon. Okay, it
Hmm.
didn't end very well, but the fact of the matter was that they actually made to figure out, how do you club people and their tastes and make them buy together and things like that. So I still think that, look, the innovation is not necessarily on the product side only. Okay, I think there's a lot of products to be built, but it could be distribution, it could be, how you package things together and all that. So I mean, it's just hard to pinpoint to say what is interesting. A lot of times you just look at something and say, well, what is the interesting twist you put to it? And the other thing also is that, look, because people are digitally connected, you can actually scale up much faster. But at the same time, you can also burn out a lot faster. So from that perspective,
Yeah.
I think it's a very different dynamic. What I think is lacking today is there isn't still enough depth in later stage funding in India. So I think we need to see more of that come up. I think there needs to be more M&A that needs to come up, because what my big fear of the market right now is that we're just building too much kind of a pipeline coming at very early stage, and there isn't enough to help it going forward. So I think that part of the pyramid has to get sorted out. We're too kind of broad at the bottom, but not enough of a base building above that. So I think that will cause some pain in the market the next three to 5 years. But other than that, it's a great market, lots of opportunity, and lots of options to build great companies.
Very interesting. And I think like one trend, or like one thing that obviously like people are really excited about right now is generative AI, right? And of course you're also building something in this space, right? So so do tell us a little bit about what you are building.
No, I'm working with a few folks to build something in enterprise AI. We're going to launch it properly, so I'm not going to talk a lot about it. But my own perspective is, look, this is a paradigm shift yet again. It's as big as what internet started. I mean, it's another form of sort of automation at one level. But automation is not necessarily a productivity thing. It's also something that allows you to create stuff in a unique manner. I think there's a lot of things changing at a very core level. uh, the cost of doing something is collapsing, the time to do it is collapsing, the ability to synthesize different things together and make them work together is enhancing rapidly. So I just think that we'll see a lot of innovation happen. I think enterprise, there will be big consumer plays, but I think there will be fewer. In the meantime, there's a lot of stuff to be sorted out on data and ethics and all those sort of things, which will hit consumer a lot more. But I think on the
Hmm.
enterprise side, you can see a whole new change coming in terms of how work will happen, how
Hmm.
software will be built. I think all the platforms will be replaced. I think uh, there's just so much to build in software, I think, in terms of what is there. So I just think that this is a start of another 10 or 20-year cycle, which will be massive in terms of what it does. And actually, it's going to change lives, change what people do in terms of their regular work. So it is big. I mean, one of the reasons I plunged myself into thinking about building a company yet again is the fact
I
that
think
this
once
is
the
this is
founder, always
big.
the
This
founder.
Yeah, this is big. This is ambiguous. This is really worth spending time in. I love complex problems, and this is it's just too big an opportunity to not get
Yeah.
excited about and not do something. But I think one thing to be careful about is, look, there's just going to be a lot of change in the basic underpinnings of how this works as well. So, uh, you know, take your time. This is good companies will take, like MakeMyTrip, for example, took 10 to 12 years to reach its potential. So I think good companies here will take their time. And if you're stepping into it, look, go for the long haul. I think there are some, to use a fashionable word, big decacorns to be built in this area.
Hmm. Hmm. Very interesting. And so I think like enterprise AI may be at the stage today where consumer internet was maybe like in 1999. Like I mean, like as you said, like we're the starting of a new technology. Which I mean, like where there's space for large companies to build over the next 15 to 20 years, right? So from that perspective, like what are some key skill sets that you feel founders need to have in a founding team to build large companies in this space today, like if when you are also thinking about it, right? Like how are you kind of thinking about skill sets, team, what are some people that you definitely need to have on board if you're looking at building a large company in this space?
See, I think when you're building an enterprise company, I mean, very early in my career, someone said that to me. I don't even remember who, but saying that, look, uh, when you're building a product, find a customer, okay? And in fact, find a customer first. Okay,
Hmm.
and the best way to build a product is with a customer. And I think to me that is a mantra that people should follow when they're trying to do something with enterprise AI in particular. Is that look, find customers and build with them,
Hmm.
because the product building itself. I think you need to be very sharp on how you finish it, but you know the core act of building has become a lot easier now. Okay, there's open
Hmm.
source and there's lots of stuff you can piece together like a Lego and put it all together. You kind of can develop stuff a lot faster. There's no code. There's just so much ease of building that has come up. But what that does is when building things is easy, then the user wants more customization.
Yeah.
Okay, and so therefore, how are you going to? I mean, to me, the biggest. I mean, I'm sorry, we're getting a bit nerdy about this, but the biggest thing that uh, generative AI is doing is it is reducing the cost of mass customization. Okay,
Hmm.
because you always felt if you got to customize, you rather build standard stuff because you know
It's
customization
scalable.
is expensive. This customization is expensive. Now customization is actually becoming a lot cheaper, and so therefore a lot of things will need to be built a lot closer to the customer. Yes, there are going to be this
Hmm.
infrastructure and platforms and all that, and most of that will come out of Silicon Valley. They're far ahead, and yes, I'm sure a few Indian companies can build some interesting parts of that. But I think if you're getting on the application side, which is the part which I'm interested in, then I think most important thing is you got to get close to the customer and figure out, well, how do I innovate and build with them? And once you build something, well, how do I make other people buy that? I think
Hmm.
I'm thinking much more micro rather than coming with a great strategy saying, look, I want to develop this product. I think, yes, you have some thoughts about it, but I think
Hmm.
this is the time when you listen to saying, well, how can you really change things for a certain
Hmm.
activity and what is the product you build for that? And once you build the product, then how do you convince thousands of others to buy that? So I think as
Hmm.
we build our company, a lot of it will be around, well, work we're doing with customers. And I think that to me is the most important thing in enterprise.
Got it. And like, and what categories like are you most excited by, like in enterprise AI? Like, like you kind of touched upon it, like like workplace automation, making like it's easier to develop, it's easier to code, right? You can do more amount of work in less amount of time. So, like, what are some exciting categories for
So
you?
I think this is an all-encompassing technology. Everything changes. I mean, there's
Yeah.
no function, no activity that's going to be left alone. And I think the key thing is, so it's also, for example, I mean, the biggest application of generative AI one is already seeing is marketing. It's already happening. You're using it in SEO, you're using it in, designing your brand, everything. So I think from that standpoint, I think, look, you can practically approach any segment of the market and say there's a company to be built there. I think
Hmm. Hmm.
also what is really important to figure out is how do you reconfigure, uh, you know, a particular part of your business based on this. So if you're distributing in a certain manner, well, can you change the economics of distribution itself for digital products where you're able to combine three or four things coming together at the same time? I think there's just so much to figure out here in terms of, look, if you collapse basically a lot of your cost structure and time taken to do things, you know, it's not just about, well, I've got to take the cost out and give it to the bottom line. It's just that now that you've got that, how do you reconfigure things to build something an entirely new way of distributing or way of producing? I think there's just challenges across the board. So I don't think there's a specific area where you take any area, whether it's how do you do your basic shared services work like finance, HR, and all that. Tons of changes coming there. Marketing, tons of changes there. Products, I
Hmm.
think, look, how do you combine different things or different functionality or bundle things together? I think lots of changes coming there. So it's, again, I go back to it. This is not about, well, one little thing is changing. This is everything is changing.
Hmm.
And so therefore it gives you a lot of freedom to consider a lot of things. But I think it's very important that you're able to get very precise about how customers will pick things and use things and what benefit they will get from it and make that
Hmm.
work in one or two occasions. And if you make it work in one or two places, then there's a big enough market for practically everything that you can replicate that and build a big company. So I just think this is the start of another big cycle, and you're going to see some massive businesses built here.
Amazing, amazing. I think, Neeraj, thank you so much, for such a wonderful, insightful chat. Right? Like, I mean, like, so we talk to a lot of early stage founders on a day in and day out basis, right? So like, what would be like your one parting advice be to early stage founders, who are starting up today?
I think, look, be very clear about what what you want to create and what difference it makes to the people who will use it or consume it. Okay. And that clarity and why it is why you're doing it and why is it different. And I think that clarity to me is at the base level the most important thing. Everything else is detail around that. If you've got
Hmm.
that clarity and you're absolutely convinced that what you're doing is useful and different. I think those are the two words I really like, useful and different. I think a lot of times you create
Hmm.
things which are not really useful. Okay.
Yeah.
And a lot of times
Yeah.
you create useful things which are not really different. So I think it's a bit of both. You need to be creating something as useful and different, and everything else is detail around that. I mean, if you get that right and you're determined to make that work, I think that's what happens there.
Yeah.
I don't like the concept that, look, I have a great idea. Great ideas are fine, but I think there's a lot of it about, well, does somebody else think it's a great idea, and can you really push yourself to really get that done?
Interesting, interesting. And is there any framework, for useful and different, like that founders can use?
Uh, I am not a huge fan of frameworks. I think to me, it's all about most of the good ideas come. I mean, take Ashish out of business. I mean, he had a lot of insights about the problems of small businesses. Okay,
So being close to the
and
consumer.
yeah, so I think when you understand a problem, you really own the problem. You've seen the problem at a very close quarters. I mean, for example, I mean, David Gandler, had this crazy idea that I see a trend of Americans watching a lot of what they call soccer, which is actually football,
Yeah.
not the football they play
Yeah.
with hands. Um,
Yeah.
so his idea was, look, I think Americans are getting ready to watch soccer, and I want to give them a platform where they can watch soccer. Now,
Hmm.
anybody who's following sports in the US would think he's crazy, but this guy had that insight. He said, I'm going to just make that happen. And he had
Hmm.
the absolute most bizarre strategy of how he built the company. So
Hmm.
I think from that standpoint, and all the good entrepreneurs I've seen, it's all about saying, look, I see this problem, I've seen it, I've experienced it. Not that somebody's told me or read in the paper, I've seen it myself. And I want to solve
Hmm.
this problem. I think some of the best things come out of that. So
Personal
um,
experience.
yeah, personally, you're seeing something, and I think, look, if you can combine two things, where, for example, take AI. If you learned enough about what does AI actually do and how can it be useful, and then you equate
Hmm.
that to a problem you've seen, then I think
Hmm.
something interesting can come out of that.
Hmm. Hmm. Super, super interesting. And like, I can't let you go without your thoughts on Accelerate, right? Like, so we're trying to build one of India's best early stage accelerator programs, right? And we talk to hundreds of founders on a day in and day out basis, helping them with access to capital, mentorship, partnerships, and route to market, right? So where, like, if you were to give us any advice, right, like, where do you think we can add most value, for early stage founders today? Like, would love that.
I think one thing which I mean, I talked a little bit about, look, spending time and understanding alignment, empathy with the ecosystem. I think that's one part of it. But I think the more important thing to me, which you guys can do, which very few people focus on, is basically resilience. I
Hmm.
think everyone's talking to founders about, well, how do you find the market and how do you kind of find the team and all that. A lot of it is said and a lot of it happens as a natural course. But I think what people don't realize is that, look, the founders need a lot of support in staying the course, in dealing
Yeah.
with tough problems. And also in this world today where, the social media, yes, you can get ridiculed. You are seeing other people succeed. There's greater focus on mental health and the kinds of issues that you go through. I think
Yeah.
that to me is an area where you could be fairly different and unique to say, look, I'm. It's not about, well, where you start and how you think about things, but it's also, how do you stay the
Your
course and
support
stay
system.
strong,
Yeah.
and how you finish well. I think that is something which is a gap in the market. Very few people actually focus on that part as a science. I think it's there in pieces that emerge from relationships. But I think, look, that's something should we should talk about a little bit more often. Because
Hmm.
one thing that
Hmm.
people are not seeing is, look, this is a very hard life as a founder, and how do you
Yeah.
kind of help them get through that. I think we can clearly enhance our overall success rate if we are able to make people get up when they fall and to help them get up when they fall. I think that is something that's really important here.
Got it, got it. I think real words of wisdom for us. We'll really take this, as one of the pillars for us, and really help try help founders, succeed in their journey. Thank you so much, Neeraj. For giving us this 1 hour very insightful chat. Loved hearing about your journey over the last few years, like not few like over like almost 3 decades, right? And wishing you all the best for your new venture. I'm very sure it's going to be a huge success, like what you've built in the past, and can't wait to collaborate with you on Accelerate. Can't wait to keep learning from you, and just wishing you the best in your journey.
Thank you very much and a real pleasure. Thanks a lot.